Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and thank you so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally the use of sound for health and wellness. Today, our guest is Joshua Leeds, a sound researcher, producer, musician, and educator, and an authority on psychoacoustics. And we talk about what sparked his interest into the mindful use of sound and psychoacoustics, as well as parts of psychoacoustics that are really important for us as sound practitioners to understand. We also explore a important figure in this field, a foundational figure that not too many people know about, Alfred Tomatis. And we also discuss the future of sound work. And Joshua Leeds really believes that sonic activism, music as a service, is so important and so needed. This is really an inspiring conversation. I think it's going to give you with a lot of things to think about and look into. And Joshua gives us many resources as well. So I hope this is inspiring for you as well. Joshua will be a part of the International Sound Therapy Association conference in Sarasota this September. I will be there as well, and so will many recent guests like Sarah Auster, Ben Carroll, Mike Tamburo, and many others. So if you would like to attend an in-person conference where there's going to be presenters and performances and lots of great networking and connections, check out istasounds.org. I'll be sure to drop that in this podcast description as well. And I also want to thank the Om Shop and Spa. They are sponsoring this episode, and the Om Shop is located in Florida and is the country's largest showroom of vibrational tools. They can offer you assistance when you're really looking to up-level your tools and instruments. And they have a lot of good resources as well on their website, theomshop.com. And if you're able to make it there in person, they have a luxury spa as well. So thank you so much to the Om Shop for their support. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Joshua Leeds. All right, welcome, Joshua. It is so wonderful to have you here. It's an honor to have you as a guest on this podcast.
Thank you so much. It is my honor to be here.
Well, let's, as much as you want to, just go into your background. The first thing I'm curious about is what sparked you to get into the field of psychoacoustics and the mindful use of sound?
That's a great question, and I'm going to try to do the briefest answer I can on that. I was living in Hollywood. I was a young man. I was there to get a rock and roll contract. I did my demos. I brought him into an attorney. The attorney listened to him and he said, I can get you a record deal, even though you're kind of like a Jackson Brown lookalike. I can get you or sound alike. I can get you a record deal if you're willing to play heavy metal and wear leather pants on stage and cut the ass out of the leather pants. I can get you a deal. And that was the moment when I went, no, that's not what I came here for. That's not what I'm here for. And I went into film composing. I was living in Hollywood and I went into film composing. And what I discovered was that was not my bag either. Because what they wanted to do was to basically, at the last moment, under a tremendous amount of pressure, have me write music behind screeching tires and shooting guns. And I just went, I don't even watch that stuff. And let alone, I don't want to glorify it. And so after a lot of consideration, I just went, okay, I need help. Where am I going to go? My rock and roll career is gone. This film composing thing is gone. That's not going to happen. And, when you ask for help, sometimes you get it. Sometimes you get it. And sometimes you get it when you ask. Other times it takes a while, but you always get it. But I got it. And what that was is it was an invitation to go to see a woman who has now left the planet by the name of Louise Hay. And Louise Hay wrote a book called You Can Heal Your Life. And before she wrote that book, she was living in a little apartment in Santa Monica And I went there and I met her. And when she found out that I was a composer, she asked me if I would like to collaborate with her. And that was the beginning of my journey into what I then came to call psychoacoustics, because sound healing did not and still does not work for me. Then the reason why it didn't work for me was because the FDA here in America was quite vigilant about people who were making claims about healing. And I went, why put a lot of time and energy into creating something that might have a therapeutic impact, but then get closed down by the United States government or any government? And what I also realized was that I was interested in not only creating music as a producer and as an artist for health and well-being, but also for productivity and for learning. It was like those were the three areas that I sensed: health, learning, and productivity, that conscious, intentional, purposeful music and sound could be used. And when I discovered the word psychoacoustics, I kind of went, oh no, people hear psycho and Alfred. I got two Alfreds in my life, Alfred Hitchcock and Alfred Tomatis. And Alfred Hitchcock, with his movie Psycho, made it so that everybody was afraid of that term. But at the same time, it really nailed it for me, because psychoacoustics is got many definitions. But when I put together a bunch of definitions into one, it was really about the study of the perception of sound. That's the official designation for psychoacoustics. But what I also discovered is that there were many people that were thinking about it in terms of the perception from a physiological vantage point, i.e., our ears and our skin, all the ways that we take in sound. And it was also about a physiological reaction to sound. So it was the perception of our physiological and our psychological relationship to sound. And I just went, you know what, Alfred Hitchcock did the deal, but I'm just going to have to see if I can kind of revise this in history and as time goes by, not in the big history, but the little history of my life. And I started to talk about psychoacoustics as opposed to using the term sound healing, because to me, it was broader. Sound healing is a small little field. It's also the reason why I started to, as I was thinking about how can I articulate concepts about therapeutic music and sound, I came up with the word sound work. It's funny, now we talk about sex work or social work or all kinds of work, but I thought, well, this is and I have a very dear friend of mine in the field, very dear colleague, and he keeps on saying, why can't you call it sound play? And I'm going, well, because it actually isn't just play, it's serious. We can use sound in many, many different ways. And so it was at that same time, back in the mid 80s, when I came up with the term sound work to be able to essentially describe the whole big tent of people who were intentionally using music and sound. And we know that music is sound, but music and sound, or sound, as a means of being able to have a specific impact on the human. And now that's widened to animal, and that's widened to plants, our interbeingness with everything. How to use music and sound and vibration, which is what we're really talking about, purposely, positively. And that's what Soundwork's about. Now, I just went off on such a wide thing. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that maybe the point to explore just a little bit further for sound healing practitioners, which, is a big part of the audience, what is important for them to understand about psychoacoustics when they're doing this work?
When they're working with sound healing.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in niche, and I'm a great believer in tight focus. I mean, we get really good when we do that. And so for people who are working with sound healing, quote unquote, I guess that the point that I would like to bring forward is I have found that in this little field of intentional music and sound, it's getting to be a bigger field. And it becomes a little bit it's important to not, while being niche oriented, to not self-limit. When I think back on when I started in this field in the 1980s, a lot of things have happened and a lot of things have progressed. What I was studying and interested in back then, back in the day, way back in the day, was very different than what is available now through all the tools that we all know, the technology and the internet and all that stuff. There's also a cultural need that is going on. People need all the healing, quote unquote, they can find. COVID was a big wake-up call for us on many levels. And so I think, in answer to your question, I'd like to say to people who are kind enough to listen to our conversation that it's very important to be wise. And wisdom, I have found, comes intuitively and it comes empirically. And they're both important, and they're really important to put together. And that's what makes us whole. And so how do we become whole with our use and our attraction to vibration? Some people are into body work, some people are into aromatherapy, some people are into psychotherapeutics and Jung and Freud and all kinds of other, some people are into body work, and there's all kinds of therapeutic ways that we can reach out and be with somebody. And usually when people are coming to see us on a therapeutic level, it's because they're out of balance and they are looking for homeostasis to bring that balance back together. And the way that sound work looks and feels and tastes is very different in 2024 than it was in 1984 when I started on my journey.
Yeah, and things are changing rapidly as well. I think in a little bit we'll talk about the future of sound work. But I think what I want to bring into next, maybe this is a good time to bring this into awareness, because this is talking a bit about someone that was very influential to you, but also why it's still important to have Alfred Tomatis in people's awareness. And the reason I mention that is because over the past 5 years of having this podcast, I was telling you this earlier, no one has said Tomatis's name. Not anyone. So my question is, why do you think that is? Why do you think he's been left behind? And why do you think it's important? And what do you want people to know and appreciate about his work?
That's the best question you could ask me. It really is. It's a question that I appreciate because Tomatis, spelled Tomatis. You say Tomatis, I say Tomatis. It's like, it's like tomato. It's like Tomatis. And in French, I understand that it is pronounced, in my French is terrible, tomati. And Tomatis was a French guy, and the way that we pronounce it in English is Tomatis. And Alfred Tomatis was the guy that I could spend my life in this field. This guy is the rock. This guy is the anchor. This guy, to me, has laid down the foundational concepts that define and make Soundwork deep. Like we can all just go, hey, isn't this great? Can't you feel the vibration on this? And blow a didgeridoo, 3 inches away from my heart and go, isn't that great? Didn't you feel a vibration of it? And we get kind of carried away with the fascination of it. I can remember when I was a young dude and I'd go to a Grateful Dead concert in San Francisco, and it's like I'd get right up there next to the speaker and stand there in front of the speakers and just go, God, I'm feeling it. And I'd go home that night, my ears were ringing horribly. And I'd wake up the next morning, they were still ringing horribly. And I was going, I could feel it. Well, that's 3 different conversations there. But the one that I want to make is not about ruining your hearing, which I did, but it's about this concept of feeling vibration. And is it a toy? Are we fascinated by it? Or is it a science? And is it to be used respectfully and honored? And Tomatis was the guy who spent his life. Tomatis was born in 1920 and he died in the year 2000. And he spent his life mostly in France, and he laid down the groundwork that that I feel is the foundation for our field. And then he died. And then he sank like a stone, to use a Leonard Cohen term. And I couldn't believe that. I was doing a podcast and somebody said, I've just interviewed 34 people and not a single one of them mentioned Tomatis. And I was deeply grieved by that. Now, there's a lot of learning in that, because I thought back to something called the Bach revival. Natalie, you told me you're a violinist, which means that you studied classical music, and you know that Bach, of course, is the guy. I mean, that Bach laid down his figured bass, laid down the foundation for classical music, aside from the 1,150 symphonies and quartets and amazing pieces of music that he wrote. And he died in 1750. And the same thing happened to him. And it was not until 1829 when Felix Mendelssohn, a composer in Paris, discovered a manuscript of St. Matthew's Passion of Bach, an amazing piece of Bach's work, and performed it, did the first full performance of it in 79 years. Now, that began what is now known in music history as the Bach revival. People went, oh my God, who wrote that? And I'm just going, is this what happens when we die? The work that we do just kind of goes underground, it goes subliminal, like it goes, that, is this just what happens? And then if it's of deep value, it's like the plants that lose their leaves during winter and then they come back up in spring. Is wisdom like that? And I don't know if it is. But I know that your question brings to mind another consideration, and that is, why in 2024 are very few people talking about Tomatis? I've really had to ponder that question. I'm writing a new book, and that new book was in fact sparked by my awareness that nobody was talking about Tomatis. And I just went, oh my God, I can't let that happen. I need to be an advocate for his work, because his work was so important to me. But yet, look at you, there you are. Here you are. You're doing your work, and is Tomatis a part of your world? I'm going, well, what is it that somehow Tomatis is not relevant? Or is he? So I did a bunch of research. I was teaching a class, and I did a bunch of research into what had happened since 2000. And the quick answer to that is that his son inherited Tomatis's business that he had built in the 40 or 50 years before he died. He had tried to train people and then to set up centers all around the world. And there were, at the time when he died, there were about 200 centers set up. And the Tomatis core principles all were poured into his method called the Tomatis method, which was and is a methodology that is using resonance entrainment and pattern identification in order to have an effect neurologically. And so who are the patients that go and see him? Many people in the autistic spectrum are brought to him. Many people who have got issues with concentration, with ADD, ADHD, with different wiring, cognitive, neurological wiring. And his method is all filtered Mozart and Gregorian chant. And you very rarely talk to anybody. And yet many people, millions of people, have had miraculous impact by this very controlled therapeutic process of having a what they call a listening test, not a hearing test, but a listening test, and taking that information on a graph and going, oh, where is it that this human being is not taking in a full spectrum of sound? And the concept is that sound is a nutrient for the nervous system. And so if somebody is not taking in a full spectrum of sound, then it would be like you eating your dinner and you not being able to assimilate your protein, that it's going to have an impact internally. This is something that people spend days talking about. It's the concept of sound therapy, to me, that many other derivations have come down the line. Tomatis is, like every genius, revered and reviled. Because for some reason, our science-based world eats their young. They don't welcome them and say, come on, what have you got? What an interesting concept. How can we help to develop that and to see how we can make it better, or that it's jive? And instead, they try to shut people down. And they tried to do that with Tomatis. The end result of that was he basically gave back his MD's license, and he was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he said, here, I'm no longer a doctor. Don't bother me anymore. And he has written a number of books. And I would like to recommend a brief reading list for anybody involved in the field of sound. His autobiography, they decided to bring him into America and started to translate and publish him in English in the late 80s. And his book, that I thought was easily available on Amazon, is, and I've been getting some feedback that is not so easily available. If you can find it, is called The Conscious Ear. And if you cannot find that, then I recommend a book called When Listening Comes Alive by Paul Madaule, Madaule. I also recommend a book called Listening for Wellness by Pierre Solier. It's written in English, Sollier. And then finally, there is a beautiful chapter in one of my books called The Power of Sound that I wrote extensively about Tomatis because his work is so intense and so great. Now, I'm giving you I'm just talking a storm here. Shall I continue on here, Natalie?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I wonder, this is just really wonderful just to bring respect to his work. And, you know, whether people have heard of him or not, it's probably just kind of surfacey, right? I had read about him, maybe in your book or a Google search. But what I wonder what you think is important to be aware of. We might not be playing a Gregorian chant in our work or whatever exactly he did, but what do you think it is about his work that we now can bring
Into
into
your work.
our times
Yes.
and into our work? Yeah.
What a great question. Thank you. So when I think about Tomatis, I think about two facets of Tomatis. I think about his core principles that were then all tucked into his therapy called the Tomatis method that is alive and well. And anybody can go online and go to tomatis.com, and it's operating out of Europe. And they are training therapeutic professionals, people who've already got licenses as some kind of therapeutic professional, including life coaching, interestingly enough. And they will take you to the first level in a weekend seminar, and they are training people to then use gear, electronic gear that is appropriate to the age that we live in. And by the way, the Gregorian chant was a way to be able to cool out and chill the nervous system during the Tomatis method. What you're listening to primarily is filtered and gated Mozart. And unfortunately, we don't have the time for me to go into what these things are, but more to the point of your question, I think about Tomatis in terms of his core principles that can be applied to any sound work. And then I think about Tomatis in terms of the Tomatis method. Let's put the Tomatis method to the side. It is from my vantage point, it is one of the most serious sound therapies that anybody could study and could utilize in their practice if they have already got some kind of a psychotherapeutic, or they're a nurse or a psychologist or a speech and language therapist or an occupational therapist or even a life coach, apparently. Go to tomatis.com. And it might be a game changer for you people who are listening, in terms of how can you utilize his extraordinary core principles now to help people. But back to Natalie's great question of what can you take and put into your grab bag that you are using with sound? I call these the Tomatis core principles. And I'm going to run through, there are 7 of them. And somebody else might say, oh no, there's 17 of them. And somebody else might say there are 3 of them. And so this is from a la Joshua Leeds, okay? That the primary function of the ear is to convert sound waves to electrochemical impulses that charge the neocortex of the brain. But the bottom line of that, the primary function of the ear is to charge the neocortex of the brain. So therefore, you start to think about sound from a different vantage point. You're going, oh, all right, I can use sound that either charges the nervous system or discharges the nervous system. Now, which does which? Well, higher sounds tend to charge the nervous system. Lower sounds, the bass sounds, tend to discharge the nervous system. I want to go into why, but we don't have time. Okay. Something else that is a major piece is sound is a nutrient for the nervous system, a la the good doctor, Alfred Tomatis. Sound is a nutrient. We can either charge or discharge the nervous system by the sounds we take in through both air and bone conduction. Now, how do you use that in your sound work? Well, you start to go, all right, first of all, how do I treat myself? And in the same way that I think about what are the nutrients that I'm putting into my nervous system? Through my mouth. How about through my ears? Then we begin to think about, well, what are the nutrients that my own particular body needs? Am I sluggish? Am I in a lot of pain? Am I hyper? Do I have difficulty concentrating? I like to think about, I've used this analogy for a long time. I like to think about music like chocolate. I love chocolate. Who doesn't love chocolate? Just about everybody loves chocolate. But all you really need is one really good piece. Now, if I say, Natalie, yo, Natalie, if you were going to only listen to one piece of music in a day, if sound is a nutrient for the nervous system, what would that piece of music be? today.
Today. Well, because you said Mendelssohn, it brings me to a very early childhood memory of seeing and witnessing and hearing Mendelssohn's E minor violin concerto being played. So that's my choice for today.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So thinking from the vantage point that sound is a nutrient for the nervous system, that would be the first place that you would start off, rather than saying, okay, am I surrounded by good sound, bad sound? That's, of course, an important question. But the question that I'm asking is, what would you do to treat yourself with sound, understanding that sound is a nutrient for the nervous system? And so that's the reason why I was talking about chocolate. It's like, I love chocolate, but all I really need is one good piece of chocolate. And it's the same thing with music. And I used to talk about going on a fast, going on a musical fast, and just picking one piece or two pieces. So it's like you would just go, I'm so hungry for this. And then when you would listen to it, it's not just background. You are seriously taking that in. Well, that totally ties in with Tomatis and his core principles, because if the primary function of the ear is to charge the nervous system, it's not to hang jewelry on or wear our glasses or chit chat and go, oh, how's the weather in Iowa? It's not about that. It's really about what is the use of sound? And of course, the most beautiful use of sound is going to be music. Isn't that the most beautiful approximation, aside from a baby's laughter or a cat purring or whatever it is that people, somebody, it might be the sound of rain. It might be, everybody has what they consider to be the most beautiful aspect of sound. And we're saying, guess what? The whole purpose of the ear, the whole purpose of hearing, passive, listening, active, is to charge the nervous system with sound. That unborn babies that are deprived of sound are born with all kinds of issues. That sound, Tomatis believed that sound helped to grow the unborn baby. Okay, so the third core principle is communication is a process that begins in utero. And that communication, if it's broken between the mother and the child, somehow seems to have possibly the impact of shutting down, not opening up. Big concept, too big for just a minute. Quality of an individual's listening ability will affect both spoken and written language development. Now, when you think about that, the quality of an individual's listening ability, that means your ears, Natalie. We're talking your ears, everybody's ears, and we're talking our skin, because we know that we take in sound and vibration through our skin. Tomatis like to turn everything on its ear, so to speak. The prevailing wisdom was that the ear is differentiated sound. No. That the ear is differentiated skin. Like these weird little radar dishes on the side of our heads are actually, people thought, it's just bunched up skin, evolved that way for specific reasons, but that the ear is differentiated skin. And what Tomatis did was he turned it around and went, the skin is differentiated ear, meaning that we are wired to perceive vibration, which is the stuff of sound, the stuff of music. We are wired to sense and feel vibration through our skin, which covers every part of our human earth suit. All right. And so when he talks about the quality of an individual's listening ability, if we have difficulty listening well, it affects our articulation, how we speak to people, and it affects our ability to write our thinking, our feelings down. Now, these are two core pieces of being alive. And if we can't figure out how to, I mean, there are a lot of people who have trouble being on this planet with all these other people. And if we are not able to speak, talk about how it is that we feel, what it is that we think, we can't write it well, we're going to have a difficult life because we're surrounded by people everywhere around us, 8 billion of us. And so the quality of an individual's listening ability ties in with the concept that there is a distinction between hearing and listening. That hearing is passive. Oh, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I got the radio on in the background. I'm kind of hearing it. I don't know who is on it. I'm not really listening to it. Hearing is passive. Listening is active. Tomatis is saying, you need to have your active listening chops together. And I can help to do that through the use of filtered Mozart. Isn't that weird? Like, of all the ways to do it, but what he found was a way to basically say the auditory system essentially can close down like a garage door, like you hit an automatic garage door that comes down and then you hit the button and it goes back up. Well, the same thing happens with the ear. Tomatis believes that the ear is like an onboard sampler that can basically tune out the vibrations that are injurious to us physically or, more importantly, psychologically. The ever critical father, the mean kids at school, a brother and sister who always used to make fun of you, or a parent that was very angry, or whatever. That it's interesting that the middle ear, with its 3 tiny bones and 2 even tinier muscles, have the ability to essentially shut out the vibrations of that which is injurious to us. And then it's like we know how to do that, but we don't know how to then 20 years later open it back up. And in the meantime, we've closed down, or think of like cheese. Think about like Swiss cheese. We've punched a bunch of holes in our hearing. We're no longer taking in a certain vibration because that was the vibration of somebody that used to make us feel bad. Okay, so this is his distinction between hearing and listening is the same as like seeing and looking. The ability to be able to enhance our active listening skills. Oh, that's why it hurt so bad to find out that nobody was listening to him, that it was like Bach in the ground and no St. Matthew's Passion. It's like, come on, are you kidding? It's like there's this resurgence of interest in music and sound, and yet at the same time, we're forgetting about the heaviest guy in our whole deal.
Yeah, I almost wonder, with what you've expressed, so many of these foundational concepts are out there, but perhaps people aren't attributed it, giving him just even talking about them. I'm sure the listeners are aware of active listening and deep listening and all these concepts, but they don't know where it came from, and they don't know of the history of Tomatis.
Yeah. So look, the Tomatis core principles. I thought, okay, may I make this available if people go to my website? Does that work? Okay, my website is Joshua, Joshua, Leeds, Leeds.com. And if you sign up for my email list, then I will see, Natalie will let me know when this thing is running. And I'll know that anybody who has signed up in those days in mid-May, I will take your address and I will send you out a copy. I will do it myself. I don't even have anybody who would do it. I need a personal assistant. I will send you a copy of the Tomatis Core Principles because they are so intensely relevant to who we are and where we are now. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone listening will appreciate that, and just for really laying that out there, such foundational information that absolutely, it's unfortunate that people don't talk about his work, but you are, and now more people are going to be aware of it. So thank you so much for that. And you kind of led into the next area of where we are now. And
Yeah.
what a amazing time we're in. What a developmental time we're in. I'm curious, there's so many directions we could go here with now and in the future of Soundwork. But before we pressed record, you were saying there's some amazing things happening right now. That's just, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's presently happening in Soundwork, whether it's research, your own work, artificial intelligence, the future, but also sonic activism. There's so many directions we could go here. What's most important to you right now? What is just keeping you alive and keeping you going in this work?
Oh, you know what? That's a great question. You're really great at what you're asking and sincerely asking. Every one of those are like I'm going, how do I do this a little bit, just a little bit? AI is so important. It's going to have a big impact on our field. When people go up to my website, they'll also get a copy of a deep dive that I took into AI when it was first coming into our awareness about 6 or 8 months ago. And I'll send that out as well. AI is going to have a big impact, but I'm not going to even start on that right now. Sonic activism is my deal. When I'm writing a new book, it's called Soundwork on a Hot Rock, and hot rock refers to sustainability and global warming, obviously. And Soundwork we've talked about. And I'm going, how do we make a difference as sound workers? Now, in preparation for this conversation with you earlier, I went back and I went, oh my God, all right. One of the questions that Natalie wanted to ask me was where and how did I get into this? And I got into this in 1985 and I went, holy moly, 1985 was 40 years ago, más o menos. I mean, close enough for rock and roll. It was 40 years ago. And I thought, where are we going to be in 40 years from now? And I'm going, all right, we're in 2024. In 40 years from now, we're going to be in 2064. Will you still need me? Will you still feed me? And so I'm looking at, in the span of my professional involvement in this field of this last 40 years, and I'm going, Natalie, I'm looking at this lovely young lady, and I'm just going, where are you going to be the wisdom that you're going to have in 40 years from now? What is it going to look like on this planet? And I'm just going, well, we don't want to get caught in a despair narrative about how bad things are, but we want to be realistic. There are sometimes, as I've taken to reading history, because I'm going, I better know what I'm somewhat talking about and have a little bit of perspective. And so I've started to delve into looking at what has happened in human behavior and the cycles that people move in. And then this ties into your question about what lights me up about this field now. What I've become aware of is that there are cycles. They might be 20 years, they might be 120 years, they might be 300 years, it might be 20 minutes. But there are cycles where life has been easy. Things were good on the farm. Then there were other times where, oh, this is a drag. Life is just is deep in dissonance. Can somebody give me some resonance here in what they call the Dark Ages? Can somebody give me some resonance between 1918 and 1945? Okay. And then I go, well, when did I live? And I went, boy, I lived in an easy time. And then I think, what is my daughter going to grow up in? When I go to swim, to a gym to swim, and I look at these little babies, 2 years old, 3 years old, and I think, boy, they're going to live through this entire time. And we know what's coming. I mean, we just know it. I mean, the global warming is the big one. And then set against that backdrop, boy, there's a lot of dissension and there is a lot of dissonance. And I think it's going to get dark for a while. I think it's going to get dark for, I don't know. I don't know if is it 10 years? Is it 40 years? Is it 60 years? I don't know, but I think it's going to get intense. And then hopefully we're going to have a renaissance on the other side of it. But everybody who's listening is going to be in heaven by then. But nonetheless, understanding the continuum that we operate in, then we're just going, okay, we're part of this continuum of human beings being alive. And what do we bring? And so what do we as sound workers bring? And that's the question that I have been asking since I became aware of the fact that nobody was talking about tomatas. And I thought, I need to write a book. And then I thought, oh, it's such a hassle to write a book. And do I really want to write a book and just be this guy who talks about somebody else named Tomatas? And I kind of went, no, I'm going to be selfish. I want to go out and enjoy my life and not be tied to computers and words and editors and all of that. And then I started to look at global warming. And that brought up the R word for me, Natalie. It brought up the R word. The R word is relevance. What is the relevance of a sound worker in 2025, 2035, 2045? Well, we don't even know what it's going to look like. And the way it's going to look in Bangladesh is different than the way that it's going to look in Kansas. But I started to just think, okay, we're birthing a new generation of people and sound workers. And so maybe this is the reason why Tomatis work, which is one-on-one work, is not so relevant now. I think a lot about the concept of the culture as a patient, not as an individual, as a patient. And in the 1990s, there were all these programs that were designing musicians to be therapeutic bedside musicians. Then they got into a big hassle with the music therapist because they're therapeutic bedside musicians as well. Only they've got the investment and the time, and they've been trained. And they've been trained to not only play music at the bedside, but also to do therapeutic work. And so they found a way to be able to make distinctions and to make peace with each other. And a lot of people were trained, thousands of people were trained to take their harps or their guitars or their voices or their violins and to work in hospital rooms or to work with the dying or to work one-on-one. And I think that there's a big change that's going on right now. And that big change is that it is no longer that the individual is the patient that the sound workers are working for, but it is the culture. And so that brings us into the realm of being community musicians or being public musicians. Now, why? I'm go to sleep with this and I wake up with it in the morning. Those 5 little words, why, where, how, when, and something. I don't remember right now. Why, where, when, who. Maybe there's only 4 of them. But there's always a 5th question anyway. But anyway, what is going to be needed? And what I keep on coming up with is the concept of social cohesion. Now, I had to look up social cohesion to make sure that I really was talking about the right thing. And I actually wrote it down, that cohesion arises when bonds link members of a social group to one another and to the group as a whole. In other words, it's the warm and fuzzy feel good of like, we're all one. So it's a spiritual concept, but thinkers, theorists, scientists, philosophers have been noticing social cohesion happens throughout history, long history. And what is one of the best ways for creating social cohesion? Music. That's a skin tingler for me. That gives me goosebumps. That on a certain level helps me replace the mental gymnastics of Tomatis work and brings me to what is happening in 2024 and why is it that Tomatis is not thought of these days? And I'm going, it's because the sound workers like you. I'm looking at Natalie's, and for people who will see this on a visual podcast, and you'll see she's got a beautiful mudra, a beautiful geometric shapes, beautiful piece going on. And right over her right shoulder, she's got a beautiful metal Tibetan bowl, right? That's sitting on top of a speaker. So there's lots of sound imagery, and there's lots of beautiful imagery that is taking place here right over Natalie's shoulders. I want your studio. It's beautiful. I think that sonic activism is the deal. And sonic activism is about bringing social cohesion. Yes, why have sound baths become the concept of sound therapy? I think about that and I get insulted by that. I'm going, Tomatis is sound therapy. Don't call that sound therapy, for crying out loud. And then I go, no. You're being a biased dude. Stand back and go, it is therapeutic for the people who right now have got a deep level of angst, anxiety, depression, when they're saying, I can't find any certainty. Now we know how the brain works. The brain works on certainty. It likes patterns. It likes regularity. When somebody's heart is irregular, they put them right in the hospital. When other glands become irregular, the body does not run on irregularity. The spirit might, but the physical body does not like a lack of pattern. Our lives now in the 21st century say goodbye to certainty. Say goodbye to the level of regular perception that our body needs to be calm. So consequently, there's a lot of people who are not calm anymore. And yet, you can play a concerto or you can dial up some kind of music that immediately will calm you down. That's social cohesion. You as a musician can bring social cohesion. The ability for people to go, oh my God, the entire town of Lahaina burned down about a year ago or less in Hawaii because of drought. It's in the middle of the ocean. How could there be a drought in the middle of the ocean? And yet all of the extraordinary shrubbery and greenery had turned brown because of the rain patterns changing. And then there was a lightning strike and the entire town burned down. Now, are we ready to train people to say, get on the next plane to Lahaina There are some people there that need some social cohesion. No, don't know how to do that yet. Maybe in 20 or 30 years they'll figure that out. But what we are is in a place where we can go, we can bring some calm to you. By incorporating the principles of sound as a nutrient for the nervous system, the primary purpose of sound is to charge the nervous system or discharge the nervous system. What's called for? So you would apply the same things, whether or not in a hospital or in a town that has just gone through a tremendous loss. I'm not going to get into politics, but we all know, even though we try to not know or we don't want to know, how weird it is in the politics of the United States of America or in the Ukraine or in Gaza. It is going to become impossible to separate the social reactivity to the environment. Why are there so many migrants coming to the United States, coming into Europe? It's because they can't grow their crops anymore. So it's all connected, and social cohesion is basically about saying, it's not all on your shoulders, Joshua or Natalie. We're going to do this together. We're going to figure out how to do this together. And music is a way to help people deactivate, de-chill, for lack of a better word, is a way to help us to find that place where we can make rational decisions and we're not stuck in survival loops. Now, this is one of the reasons why I'm excited about what's coming. Have I just answered your question? I want to bring you back in for your thoughts in this.
Yes, it reminds me of when my time in Scotland was filled with folk clubs and music sessions and community music. So what I'm hearing is like it's a folk revival. The like sound workers are the new caretakers, that whether it is a sound bath or a musical performance, I mean, you're bringing people together with the intentionalized use of sound for cohesion, for heart energy, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling from what you're saying. And though maybe all these terrible things are happening, all these things are coming out of the system, we can help de-stress people, deactivate, and maybe build some resilience to what's happening out in the world. Yeah.
Natalie, you so got it.
Mm.
Thank you. You were able to feed back to me in a few beautiful sentences what I just took a long time to say, and I'm just trying to work it out. I'm just trying to figure it out. This is what this book, Soundwork on a Hot Rock, is about. It's about, in part, what is the role of musicians as service? Music as service, as opposed to music as an egoistic expression of performance. That if you go back and you study history, I have found that in the marketplace, which was the gathering place of people, and that's been going back forever because people went to the marketplace because they wanted a different kind of food than what they grew. There were always musicians there. Always. The musicians were bringing sound. They didn't have tomatas to tell them how it was that sound was affecting the entire nervous system. And they didn't have the National Institutes of Health that has put up $35 million since 2019. Here we are in 2024, and in the last 5 years, they have financed $35 million worth of study and research into how can music be used for the patient. Now they're going back to a place where I'm going, okay, this is good. Wherever you guys want to start, go ahead and start there. And this brings me to the second piece that this book is about, my book is about, and that lights me up. And sometimes makes me go, oh my God, I don't know where to go with this. Truthfully, because I'm just trying to be an open vessel and have it come through me and figure out what I can figure out. But right about the same time, in 2017, something rather miraculous happened. This miraculous thing, it'd be interesting to just go, when have there been these inflection points in history where in a moment or in a day or in a year, this amazing level of wisdom visited the planet, and these people happen to be the ones to bring it forward. And in 2017, one of our most beloved opera singers by the name of Renee Fleming retired from active operaing. And she happened to meet Gary Collins, who was, not Gary, Francis Collins. Francis Collins, who was the scientist in charge of the Human Genome Project, a big deal, not a little deal, a big deal. And he also happened to be the head of the National Institutes of Health. And they are, for people who don't know, the primary government research grant funding organization in Washington, D.C. And they give away billions, like I think $8 billion is their budget every year for the study, for research of issues having to do with health. Renee Fleming is saying, I've always wondered what was going on out there in the audience with this music that I'm performing and these other people are performing. And now I have an opportunity to talk to this guy who puts up money. And that began a movement that is embodied in a book that just came out 2 days ago called Music and Mind. And it is curated by Renee Fleming. She is the editor of this book of 20 some odd extraordinary essays. I've only read 3 of them, and I have marked this thing up like a coloring book for me to be able to go back, and I've highlighted it to such a degree. She has started something that is taking on a life of its own. And as Francis Collins says in his introduction in this book, this young field of sound health. Now, it's a misnomer, or maybe it's a perfect title, but it seems to be a misnomer because it's not about sound. They're not spending $35 million studying sound. They're spending $35 million studying music. And they're saying, they're coming out with studies that are saying, this is what and how we use music in Parkinson's ward, and this is how we use music for pain control, and this is how we use music for in inner city schools with children. And so they're kind of coming in from an academic research vantage point, like where many of us were 20 years ago. Now, where are we? Sound workers. Well, we're responding not to an institution and not to the equivalence of what is going to get us grant money, but we're just taking our drums and we're taking our bowls and we're taking our violins and guitars and harps and everything that we have to make sound and going, where is this needed? Now, to find out more about this movement of music and mind that is extraordinary, that has brought in more scientists and academics and PhDs and all of that, who've always been interested in where this is with sound. And now with the MRIs, they can study the brain. And they are studying the brain like crazy because the music lights up the brain in so many areas that other neuroscientists are saying, if we understand how music works in the brain, then it helps us to understand how the brain works, period. So If you're interested in this enormous new advance in the field of sound work, go to a website called Sound Health and just Google it. And it's out of the University of California at San Francisco. And so it's got a kind of a wacky website name. Well, I mean, domain name, but it's called Sound Health. Okay. And so just Google Sound Health, and this will take you to what's going on with this. And so this is extraordinary. And this is all very music therapy based and music therapist based, because they're saying we're going to need the people to go into the Parkinson's wards who are better to do it than music therapists, who've already been trained to work physiologically and psychologically within hospital settings. But at the same time, something happened. I'm holding up a book right now called Your Brain on Art, how the arts transform us. It's written by a woman by the name of Susan Max Salmon and Ivy Ross, these two brilliant women. And where they're coming from is they're saying it's not just music and sound that has an impact on the nervous system, it's all art. And let's use the big brains and the big budgets and the big MRI machines and study how other forms of art can be used therapeutically. And so what does this mean for all of us who are sound workers? It means that now, due to the research that they have done and are doing, that we can now begin to collaborate with other art forms, other artists, and know that it is going to make us even more effective. And so this is, to me, the future of the field of sound work. Music and sound as an art form combined with other art forms, and music and sound studied rigorously with scientific, double-blind studies, with all the money behind it, with all the science behind it. And I'm going, isn't that interesting? This all started in 2017. Both of these movements, one is called neuro arts, kind of short for neuroaesthetics, the field of neuroaesthetics. And they call it neuro arts, Neuro arts, ARTS. And so our field of sound work just got much bigger. And to me, when you look at sound work as sonic activism, the culture as the patient, and you look at the involvement of government funding and government scientists and academic scientists studying music and sound and the addition of the arts, and you just go, boy, we got a celebrity as to front us, we got the money to study it, and we have got the demand and the need for it. And you just go, this is a great time to be a sound worker.
Oh, amazing. And how beautiful to have this balance of the science and art of this field. It's just what an amazing time and what an inspiring way to bring that all together. Thank you so much. And it's also the aspect that seems to be so important in your work and has been all along, is this balance of the science and art. So here we are, and just an amazing time to be part of this movement. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Wow.
Natalie, thank you for your great questions. They were very perceptive and of value to me in my thinking, and I'm sure of value to people that are listening. I hope of value to people who are listening.
Yeah,
And
you've left us with so much to look into and explore, with both looking back towards foundational people in this field, but all that we can lend to the world that needs us right now as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I think we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and I'm sure we will get to again. And I look forward to connecting with you later this year at the International Sound Therapy Association Conference. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations on these topics. And thank you so much for your time and all that you've shared with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for tuning into this 5-year anniversary episode of Sounds Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. You can follow and check out things at Facebook, Sounds Heal Studio, Instagram at Natalie Brown, Sounds Heal, on YouTube, on the Sounds Heal Studio channel. And thanks again for supporting this podcast. Be well and stay tuned.